Hey, Brian Breaks Characters listeners. Listen, let me start that over again because I didn't really like to sound that much like I'm a social Instagram person. Maybe we should keep that. Let me try that again. Hey everybody, welcome. I have Amie McNee on the show today, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you, Amie, for joining me.
Oh my God, Ryan, it is honestly an absolute pleasure. I'm so happy to
Oh,
be here.
I'm so glad. And you guys, Amie has such a cool, unique, fabulous, interesting background. Like reading her bio, I'm already leaning in. Like you could not even know what she does with her life, and you'd be like, I need to know everything. So, Amie, Amy's today she's talking to me at 10 a.m. in Sydney, Australia, and so I just appreciate her, meeting me up in the morning here. Over here, it's 3 o'clock in LA. So I want to ask, first of all, give everybody a little bit of your story so they know what you do and what you're about.
Of course. So I am an author first and foremost, but I'm also a creative coach and a book doula. So I write historical fiction. I'm a novelist. Like that's my craft. I'm a storyteller by nature, but I also support, witness, hold creatives as they go about this like fucking wild, wonderful journey that we go on. Am I allowed to
Yes.
swear? I always forget to
No,
ask
you're
that.
always allowed to swear, but like you said wild and wonderful, and I could just see in your eye, wild meaning it's not always wonderful is what I can.
Yeah, yeah, that's literally exactly what I mean. So I went on this journey myself. Obviously, I knew I wanted to tell stories. I was acting for a bit. I was writing, for a bit, and then really fell into wanting to write novels. And I felt so fucking alone, and I felt so unseen, and so, consumed by rejection and. I just felt so profoundly lonely in my journey. And I was like, where is the support for creatives? Where I just wanted to feel seen and acknowledge that what I was doing was difficult and brave and courageous. And I didn't have someone there to witness me. And so I became the person who I needed the most. And I started speaking about the creative journey and speaking about the vulnerability that is needed when we do what we do, as, artists of all different crafts. And yeah, I literally stepped up. I became the person that I knew that I had needed my whole life. And now I hold and support and love creators through whatever journey they are taking right now. I work with writers as a book doula, so I help books, come to life and be birthed into this world. But I work with, actors, painters, visual artists, entrepreneurs, anyone who is daring to put something out into this world with the desire to connect with others.
Oh my gosh, I just want to be like, can I just sit on your couch and listen to you talk all day? So, as you guys can see, this just very much belongs on this podcast because all we talk about here is creativity. We have a lot of
Mm,
actors who are listeners, of course, because we talk about that a
of
lot.
course.
But you said you acted in the past, and it is about the creative act is scary, lonely. And what I
Mm.
love that you kept saying is it doesn't have to be, but that's the experience we often can have. But what I heard you say is I became the person that I needed. So a lot of times I think creative people will be like, well, my parents don't understand me. They don't understand what I'm like I might as well be an outlaw to my parents. They have no idea what it means. Everything is, are you an aspiring fill in the blank?
Yes.
Because we don't know, unless you're on TV or your art is hanging in the Met, we have no idea what it means for you to be whatever it is. Is this part of the conversations you have with your clients, or is it more about, is it that and also the production of the thing that they're making?
So I'm here to support production. I'm here to support craft, but I'm not here to teach you how to get better at what you do. Like that's your
Sure.
journey. That is what and you committing and being vulnerable and daring to show up consistently. That's how you're going to get better at your craft. I'm here to hold you through the moments where you're like, fuck, my parents, are just what?
My, are you even parents around this? You forgot how to parent when it comes to this particular thing or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
I'm here to like dissect and rewrite the narratives that we hold as creatives, exactly as you said, that constant aspiring, like how are we meant to deal with the amount of people that come up to us and say, oh, can I buy your book at a bookshop? Oh, what movies are you in? Oh, could I look you up on IMDb? Like I'm here to support us as we deal with a chronic misunderstanding, like, and it's consistent misunderstanding from the world around us. Like
Oh
there
my
is
God.
just,
Yes.
a commitment to misunderstanding creatives in this world that
Yes.
astounds me, and we need support to move through that because what we're doing is really important, and what we're doing, like literally the world needs what we are doing, but we are still constantly misunderstood, and we're also plagued with narratives that can keep us very small and poor and
Mm.
up, it can be a beautiful, beautiful journey, as I said, and there is so much ease and joy to be had as a creative, but we do need support because what we're doing is incredibly vulnerable and challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and because I think what I'm also hearing is there are times when you can feel completely in the flow, and I'm doing great by myself, and then, like you said, and then the birth pain came,
Yeah,
and then you got, your first contraction, whatever that is, right?
exactly,
Right, yes.
exactly.
So, Amy, I'm sure you always get asked about this in terms of your background. Can you share with everyone what you studied at university and your focus? Because it's
Of
so fascinating.
course. So I studied medieval history at uni, but I specialized in medieval sex culture and medieval pornography and medieval sex work. I really niched down into this bizarre and wonderful and just like incredibly vibrant world of sexuality and sex in the medieval times. And I've used that and infused that in all of my historical fiction novels. And I just think it is the most interesting and obviously incredibly raunchy area of history to look at.
It's so wild when you say that because I can just imagine. Is there a lot of literature about that? Was it like, did you have to really like be a real searcher to
It
have this be a study for you?
the best, like it was like a well of information is the court records because there were so many laws about how you could have sex, how you could, display your sexuality. So a lot of people, like a lot of people got sent to court on sexual misdemeanor charges and they're in detail. So we know what everyone's out, doing out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I think, it's seriously wild. Like I think at one point, like there was like two-thirds of the city of York had been to court for sexual misdemeanor charges. Like everyone was getting pulled in and charged with some kind of deviancy in the
Wow.
bedroom.
Also, where are the sex police knocking on the door? What kind of sex are you having right now?
Honestly, I'm like, sometimes I'm like, I think the neighbors often dobbed one another in.
Oh,
I think that's how we got a lot of it. But sometimes I'm like, how did you figure this out? Everyone's like looking through each other's windows. There's this great account of the police storming into this woman's home. She's sitting naked in an apron by her fire, and she's got like five different men in all her different bedrooms, all naked. And this is all written down in like a 14th century court record. And poor women got some jail time, I think. But yeah,
oh my God.
a
Wow.
wealth of information and stories that are just, living in these court records. And I was like, how can I not write novels about
Yeah,
this?
that's what I hear you coming from. That's what you just said is how it just
Mm,
inspired so much storytelling out of like these
yeah.
super interesting. Wow, that's awesome. So I want to get more into the work that you do. So
Mm,
what came from, I'm going to write some historical fictions based on this cool study that I've had and then you're like, I needed this person. What came from the leap from myself to, I'm going to do this for other people? Can you tell us
yeah.
about that?
Well, as it often does, it took hitting rock bottom.
Hmm.
So I had written two novels. I handed them out to hundreds and hundreds of publishers. I was sitting on a throne of literally hundreds and hundreds of rejection letters. All I wanted to do was create full time, Brian. Like this was like, I was trying so many different, like I call them like muggle jobs, the boring non-magical jobs. I was waitressing, I was a PA, I was doing all of these kind of like jobs that allowed me to have time to write, when I got home. And I ended up losing that job. I lost a publishing deal that had been dangled in front of me. I ended up moving in with my in laws. I became incredibly depressed. I had this narrative that I was so fucking stupid and foolish and childlike for wanting to be a creator full time. I just felt so plagued with this idea that I was like not a real adult, that everyone was, worrying about me. And they were worrying about me. I was in so much debt, like tens of thousands worth of credit card debt, and I was now living with my in-laws. And so I was like, fuck,
Wait,
like,
living with your in-laws. Let's just pause for that for a second. That does not feel like the easiest thing in the world either. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
yeah, it was a real like, fuck.
Even as much, I'm not even saying like they have to be terrors or you have
No,
to be a
no.
terror, but the familial pressure of I'm living
Yeah,
with my
exactly.
partner's family. What does that mean? Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And like families are hard enough to deal with, even, when we're doing well creatively. But I was like flailing. And the question everyone, was asking me is like, well, what are you going to do? You can't live like this forever. Like, how are you going to pay off your debt? Like, clearly this writing creative thing, it isn't working. Like, how are you going to fix your life? And I had just become unemployed. And I was like, so I just like the lethargy that the depression left me with was mammoth. I could hardly get out of bed. But what I told myself was, you get up in the morning, you go, you put another fucking $3 on your credit card, you get a coffee and you journal. And I started my practice of journaling. And that was in April 16th, 2018. I started my journaling, and it's been like something like 1,379 days. I've journaled every single day since that day. And it was through journaling, through writing, that I literally managed to do a fucking 180. And that is how I became the person that I needed to be. And it was through this like witnessing of myself, witnessing of these stories that I was holding about what it meant to be a creator, what it meant to be a writer. And I could see the way I was relating to myself and how cruel I was being to myself. And also I could see how cruel the world
Mm.
was to artists. And I was
Mhm.
able to rewrite these narratives.
Wow. And so from journaling, you didn't know that journaling was going to hold all that for you. You just knew I have to
I
get these
had
words out of
no
me.
idea.
Yeah. Since you've done, how many, what'd you say, 1,000? How many days you say?
I think it's like 1,370 something days
Great.
in a row.
Not specific at all. So what would you say to someone around this idea of journaling? Just start writing, or is there a little bit more to, have you learned like this is a little bit better approach when you're going to sit down and journal? Is there anything you want to
Yeah.
give, any inspo you might give around that?
So I do a lot of teaching on journaling because it was my portal to abundance,
Right.
really.
Right. So
So
rather
for
than, so I don't want to make you do the whole spiel,
no,
the whole
no.
entire class, but what's one piece you might be able to tell someone to get them started
Yeah,
who's hearing this? Because I know tons of creatives who will say, I just think I need to journal. And I always feel like it feels a little too broad if I say, I just
yeah.
think I need to journal. I mean, you figured it out by doing it
I
over
did,
time.
yeah.
Right. Right.
So the biggest takeaway that I got from journaling was that I found this voice, and I call it the mothering voice. And I found, I basically stream of conscious wrote, and I just witnessed what was going on in my head on the pages, which was initially obviously like, you're a piece of shit, you're not making any money, everyone thinks you're a loser, you're never going to make it, why do you think you can do it, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end of my journaling, I would access this voice that was like, it was so gentle and
Mm,
so, it was mothering, it was so deeply compassionate. And I don't know
mm,
where she came from, but she was nearly there for day one. And I know that's not going to be the case for everyone, but for some,
mm-hmm.
miracle, she was there for me for day one. And I now teach this voice whenever I talk about journaling, because we need to counteract all of that noise and that, the trials and the inner critic with compassion and gentleness. And
Mm,
so we need to make sure that whenever we finish our journal, we are accessing a gentler voice. And so
mm,
for me, she sounds like, oh, Amie, I see you. She sees me. I think that's a big thing for all creators. We need to feel seen. This is really hard. You're doing so well, and I know it feels really hopeless right now, but I'm so proud of you for moving through it. Let's just enjoy our cup of coffee and get through this day. Nothing stays the same forever, ever. Like really kind and
yes.
gentle language. And through this voice, I was able to change this voice inside my head. And the way that I spoke to myself over time just began to change. And the way that I showed up, the kindness that I showed up with was, there every day after a while. And
Yeah.
that changed everything. And it sounds like so dreamy and romantic, but it changed everything. Having a voice
Mm.
inside my head that wasn't beating me up, that wasn't cruel, that backed me, that saw me, that knew that I was here to create. And she was this, incredibly powerful voice inside my head that allowed me to become the woman I am today.
It's beautiful. And Amie, what I think, even by saying that, I think it's great because someone could go, at the end of my journal, at least I can have this idea that I got from this person on this podcast I heard with Brian, right? That's, Amie, this incredible person, right? I should say that there's a voice that I can access that's different than the one that's just been running the show through this journaling. And even that idea feels like it can give me some space to relate to myself differently, to be ready to
Exactly.
open myself to that voice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're so critical to ourselves as creatives. Like we're doing something so vulnerable, and we're so often very unsupported by the environment we're in, that when we're also not supportive within our mind, like it's just too much against us. Like we
Yeah.
cannot thrive. We cannot thrive with an inner critic that is ruling the show. And so for me, journaling allowed a new voice, and now she is my main voice.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. She's my main voice. I love that so
Mm.
much. When you're working with someone and this voice is, like, if they're in the throes of the creative process, so I'm like thinking
Yeah.
about like an actor or something, or a writer
Yeah.
right, or like one of the screenplay writers who follows the podcast, right? And they're like, yeah, but I'm stuck on this thing, and they're journaling about it. Does that voice in your work ever become like, I have the answer, or is it really just about your relationship with yourself?
That's a great question. I mean, there's so many magical and wild things that happen on the pages. That mothering voice does tend to be like almost like a cocoon that I wrap myself up in at the end. But there are times when I'm writing and I'm sitting, with, either creative problems or, problems in my life where it is like the gods are suddenly in my ink and I will just write something and it doesn't sound like me. It's just like the answer is just like given to me on the pages.
Yeah.
Whether that's like a plot issue in my book or like a business idea, and it's just like it's real lightning bolt, and having the flow of the journaling, so you're just letting your mind pour out. Like
Yes.
we're not micromanaging, we're not writing through someone else's lens, we're just letting the words fall out. You do get those moments where you just see a little bit of gold in there. You're like, fuck,
Yes.
that's so exciting, I'm going to use that, I'm going to let that lift me up.
Yes, and I love what you're saying, because what I'm hearing in this is also like, by making this like channel or this ability to hear differently when we're in the work, we can have those inspired moments. And I love what you said earlier. This may sound a little like, you didn't say the word woo, but that might be my word. But like,
Yeah,
might sound a
yeah,
little woo,
yeah,
but
yeah.
like, and it doesn't to me because I love a woo woo thing. But I think that when you're saying those, like you said, like it mets out in the practice of doing your writing, it shows up over and over and over again, that
Mm,
it is a practical
it
tool,
does.
as different as it may sound to you in the work that you've been doing so far.
Mm.
Anyone's working here.
Definitely.
Is there a
Yeah.
piece of advice
It
that you
lets us get
find?
to know ourselves.
Say more.
Sorry.
No, no, please say more.
I could honestly wank on about journaling for so long. You've got me on one. I was just
Okay,
gonna
good.
say it kind of it lets us get to know ourselves. So, whatever type of storyteller we are, whether actor, writer, artist, um, allowing, that insight into who it is we are, that just gives us such a strong foundation for whatever craft we're going into. And I think, a lot of us, when we start journaling, we are often journaling through the lens of someone else. So, like, what if my mum was to read this? Or what if like that random fucking
Mm.
person from high school was to read this? And we think we do that with our art too, when we act or when we write,
Oh,
that we've got this lens of like, what does it look like from an external point of view? But with journaling, especially if you show up consistently, you can start noticing like, oh, I wrote that sentence for my mother. Or
mm.
and that translates into your acting. Like, I'm writing this through the lens of another. I'm censoring myself here. And we can learn, who it is we actually are and what lens is actually ours. And that translates so beautifully to storytelling and in acting, in writing, in visual arts.
Yeah, and what I just got from that so much is the idea that, if you've ever seen a film that's been written by committee, or like it went through every, the studio had 1,000 opinions and everyone, and it's watered down and watered down, like this is a most, I'm not interested, like it's not that good, it doesn't capture you. I always think
Mm.
of Wes Anderson, is that right? Royal
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Tenenbaums. Yes,
yeah.
his films have such a clear. You don't think he was like, let me get? Is that right? Was Wes Anderson right? That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, it rings a very strong
Okay,
bell
I
with
make sure
me.
it's not the guy who does the horror movies, which is Wes Craven. Which is, like Royal Tenenbaums and the and the Budapest Hotel. Like, there's such a
Yeah.
clear opinion there. There's no way he was like, let me get a lot of opinions
Yes.
about let me let everybody else's voice water down the vision that I have here. And it's not that everyone has to have a vision that looks exactly like that at all to make this point. But I think it's such a good point that you're saying, is when we have these lenses that suddenly you have no idea you've done all this work for someone else, for someone else's
Exactly.
eyes. Right.
Exactly. And I love that you use the word voice there. Like, it's about finding your voice. And like for me, my journaling practice is every day. Like, it's the first thing I do. Like, when you're spending that much time with yourself, your voice will come through, and it will permeate into your art. And that's so important for us as creators.
Yeah, we don't want to read somebody else's poem, somebody else's play, read it, right.
Exactly.
So wait, do you ever I mean, come on, Amy. Do you ever wake up and be like, fuck, I don't want to journal today? Does that ever happen?
It
Tell
did
me.
initially. Like, I don't wanna it's became incredibly easy over time.
Okay.
Initially, yeah, it did, especially when I was very depressed, because I don't wanna look at all that stuff. It was really rude and, like, mean, and I didn't wanna
Right.
sit down with my own trauma, with my own negativity, with this inner critic who spent, 24 hours of the day or 12 hours of the day harassing me. I didn't wanna sit down. But because it was the only thing that I said I had to do in the day when I was unemployed, in debt, and at home, I was like, "Just do it, Amy." And sometimes I couldn't manage very much because it was too painful.
Mm.
But I did show up, and I haven't missed a day, Brian. Like, I can't even believe it. I kind of hate myself for it. Like, who am I? But I haven't missed a day. And now for me, if I don't do it, it just doesn't feel good. Like, I just want to check in with myself. It's a little meeting with myself at the beginning of my day. where I just say, hey, how are you going? What's on your mind today?
Yes.
Like, how can I support you? How can I love you through this day? I'm so proud of you for showing up to create. You're fucking cool. You're rebellious. You're doing, the brave thing, which is you're making art.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love when you say at the beginning, it's a little meeting with myself.
Mm.
I think that is so good because I think so many of us can like flip on the radio or the news or interact with our
Yeah.
partner or whatever. And we haven't actually like washed off the day before or like gotten ourselves to a spiritually clean place to
Yeah.
be the best that we can be in that day. And I'm not saying every day has to be easy or anything, but like
No.
there's a sense of like, I'm aware of myself. Do you
Yeah.
ever, when you're doing the journaling and you're doing this work, do you ever find yourself, like, oh wait, I'm gonna write this down over here because this is an idea for a book instead, or
Yeah,
do
I
you just
do
let
do
it
that.
flow?
So I have a lot of stars next to my journaling pages, and that's ideas. So it's
Got it.
either ideas for content or ideas for book, and like the margins are just like they're often filled with little snippets, little ideas.
Got it. Love it.
Yeah, so my margins are an important place for creative inspiration.
Got it. And how did you see this affect? So I know we're really going deep on journaling right here. I hope that's okay
No,
with you. You said you could talk
bring
about
it
it. Right,
on.
right, right. So when you how do you see this affect your interpersonal relationships? I talked a little bit about that, but I want to see if you notice.
It's a really good question. No one's ever asked me that about journaling before. Um, It
It might
allows
not. I sort of force
no,
it.
it definitely does. I mean,
Okay.
it changed everything about how I existed in this world. And it was definitely like it definitely focused on me first, which is how I think we need to look at our interpersonal relationships. Like it was always about how are you doing in this relationship rather than and making sure that I'm not just bitching about people. I'm not just, it wasn't about, talking dirty about, the relationships that weren't quite right in my journal. It was always like, how am I showing up? It's been such a personal way of interacting with myself. I always start with me first. And I think that's been a huge gift for me. So that instead of having a place to bitch and moan and complain about stuff
Mm.
that isn't working, and no, I do that sometimes, fine,
Sure. We're not
obviously.
perfect. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just need to do it. But eventually I'll always come back around and be like, well, how am I showing up here? And like, do I need boundaries here? Or like, how can I protect myself? Am I projecting? The questions that I ask myself in the journal are just so powerful. And I think that has impacted the way that I relate to people because I can always come home and be like, did this feel good? Or do I need, to do more here? I'm asking the right questions.
Got it. Got it. So what I love about that is, I think you know that I'm also a reverend. So my background is in non-denominational
Mm,
spirituality. And so for me is where's your own darkness before you're going to make it about the people outside of you? Like we have to look at ourselves first, look at our own self. And it doesn't have to be darkness. It can be like, oh, I have a thing about that person. And
yeah.
so I always hold them to a different standard than everybody else for
Yeah.
some reason. What's going on with me that makes me do that? Or I've not forgiven them for that thing. So that's why I'm a jerk every time
Exactly.
I see them or whatever that, right? And so I can see journal is like you said, the meeting with yourself, you're going to get pretty freaking honest with yourself there. And I
Yeah.
think I love that magic of like this, new angel voice that comes to you at the end
Mm.
that is like, let's be kind. What's the kindness we can find inside of
Yeah,
ourselves?
the
Yeah.
compassion. And that compassion outstretches, when we are compassionate with ourselves, we can be compassionate with others.
Right.
And if we, yeah, so it allows me to start with myself and then look outwards, which I think is something that I wasn't doing. I was always, holding a lot of blame externally, what's wrong with the stuff out there. And sure, there is a lot of stuff wrong out there, but journaling allowed me to kind of sit with myself and be like, well, what
Mm.
can we do from a place of power? From what can we do from a place where we can actually have some control?
Yeah. So one of the things that I loved about when I was, doing my research on you, just so you guys know, I randomly found Amie on Instagram, was like, I'm obsessed with this person. I want her to come on my podcast. So I'm so thankful that you're here. But one of the things that you have on your website is like a quiz for people to understand who are you as an artist. And so how can I best help you, basically, essentially, right?
Yeah.
What are some kind of like archetypes that you have seen that you're like, you see all the time? These are the kind of creative archetypes that are, because I believe that when you identify yourself as an archetype, you start to relate to yourself differently. So you have some
Mm.
kindness. I think that some people can get weird, like, well, you can't reduce me to one thing. No one's
Yeah,
reducing
yeah,
anyone to one thing.
yeah. No,
We're
no,
just
no.
noticing something about ourselves so that we can relate to ourselves differently. Can you share what you
Definitely.
notice? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful lens, right, to view and understand yourself. It doesn't put you in a box.
Right.
So I have 4 main ones that come to mind immediately. It's the procrastinator, the perfectionist, the burnt out artist, and also the fraud, the imposter syndrome
Go
artist.
away. I'm hanging up this podcast. Why are you talking to
Leave
me?
me
I feel
alone.
all of those things every hour, right?
These are the things that through my coaching, I just see it again and again and again. And these are the things that I see get in people's way the most and stop them from, truly stepping up and being the artists that they're here to be.
Say them again because I want to get them right because they're so good.
Procrastinator.
Right.
And they all interlink. Perfectionist, the burnt out artist, and the fraud.
Got it. Can you talk about the fraud a little bit?
Of course.
I like that one. It's calling me today.
I have a really simple ethos when it comes to the fraud, because I just think that what we do as creators is so fucking vulnerable. I do not believe that there's anyone else who does something as vulnerable as what we do, which is like share a little bit of our soul to the universe. Like, we're just standing here naked. When we do something that vulnerable and we let ourselves be that seen, we are going to have feelings of fraudulency. And what I say, and what I want to remind anyone who's in the middle of like an imposter syndrome storm, is that imposter syndrome is a sign that you are leveling up. Imposter syndrome is a sign that you're moving into new skin, and it's uncomfortable. Like, it's uncomfortable because you've never stood here before, and you've never been witness in this space before, and your beautiful, beautiful internal thoughts are trying to protect you from how vulnerable you are. And they're saying, you're not meant to be here. People are going to figure you out. They're going to see you. It's going to be really awkward and embarrassing. You need to stay smaller because smaller is safer. But what you're really doing is you're just leveling up, and leveling up is scary. And that's always what I say about people who are feeling that feeling of fraudulency, because even though it's so fucking uncomfortable and you kind of want to vomit and you just want to shrivel up and like die, you are leveling up. And if you have the bravery and the audacity to stay in the position that you're in, and continue to be witness in the position you're in, like, abundance and magic is going to come for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Big and
one.
What you just said is I think it's a huge one, because I think so much of when we, the fraudulent and the imposter syndrome is such a dance they do together, because you have to start to say things that you believe, and as you say them and they go out of your mouth, or you put them down on paper, you're like, does that, they like leave the words leave your mouth, and you're like, and does everybody agree? Because if you do, that means I'm saying the right thing, and if you don't, it means I said something really like, it's that edgy, right? Like that much of taking a stance or taking up the space,
God,
right?
It is
So
truly
it's like
taking
breathless.
up space.
Yeah. It makes me feel breathless when I think about it.
It does. Like, to me, it feels like, all the air's being taken out of you, and you're just like concaving in on yourself. You're like, please, I just want to stay small until I get that affirmation that says, actually, I see you.
Like my photo on Instagram, or say yes, or smile, or clap, or give me the call back, whatever that is, right? So I want to ask another about it. Can I ask you about the burnout artist?
Of course.
Because I feel like you tell me if I'm wrong. It could be very easy to like, oh, it's been a long day, I'm burnt out. Like, it'd be easy to like stay in that position. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is a big topic. I have a book on it. But I think I witness a huge amount of artists who are completely burnt out, and a lot of the reason that they're burnt out, and this is such a complex issue, but one of the biggest reasons that I see that artists are burnt out is because all of their successes lie outside of their control. So all of the so it happens a lot for actors, it happens a lot for writers. They just pin everything on getting a publishing deal, getting an agent, getting the gig. And so they're constantly doing all they can, but they have no power to actually realize success on their own. So they're constantly depending on an external source to choose them. We're constantly waiting to be anointed by an outside person. And there's no amount of vulnerability, incredible pieces that we create, incredible performances. There's nothing that we can actually do to make somebody else pick us. And that lack of control frequently burns us out because we have no power in those situations. And so I talk a lot about this with burnt out artists. We have to find places where we can choose ourselves and self-anoint and self-coronate and take up space without the permission of others, because too many of us are running ourselves in the ground trying to get the attention of other people, trying to be chosen and picked by others, when the reality of it is that a lot of the time we do need external permission, but we don't need solely external permission. We also need places where we can self-coronate, where we can put the crown on our own head and say, I'm taking up space by making an Instagram and connecting with people on there. I'm taking up space by, doing my own production, and bringing the power back into our control allows
Mhm.
us to have our own power and to not feel constantly zapped by waiting on other people to see us.
Oh, it's so powerful what you just said, because I think we can put ourselves on a diet of only getting that kind of validation, and that diet
Mm.
is never going to be enough nutrition. It's never
Oh,
going to be enough. It's never going to
exactly.
nourish you enough, right? And so I just think about actors who also do stand up, or do they do improv, or writers who also like love to do spoken word things, or they do stand or whatever, just so that they're doing another place where they're, because what I'm also noticing in the way you talk about it, it does want to be kind of in the lane of what you're doing, or the same, so that you're feeding that
Mm,
specific part of your, I
exactly.
mean, there could be the actor who's like, I love making a great cake, and when I
Yeah,
ice the
yeah, yeah.
frosting, I feel the same delight that I might.
Yeah.
But it seems like if it can be in the lane, like really close to it, it will still feed,
Yeah.
so
I
that you
mean,
can own that. And like you said, self-anoint, not like
self-anoint.
sideways anoint, like make yourself the prince. No, I'm the king of acting because I did
Mm.
my own solo show, like whatever that version is.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like if you are a writer who fucking loves, singing, and you make your own album, like great. And if it feeds that like huge creative need that you have, amazing. But I think for us, if we're really, dead set on telling stories, like how can we tell stories in a way that we can self-coronate? And exactly like as you said, like, can you do your own show? Like these are the ways we bring back power into our own hands, and we show people. And again, it's only good for getting the external validation too. We show people that we back ourselves. Like we have to back ourselves before other people back us. If we
Mm.
are chosen before we've chosen ourselves, it's a bad recipe. And you can see
Oh,
in a lot of actors, a lot of creatives who get chosen before they've chosen themselves. That's also a recipe for burnout.
oh, for sure. When
Because
talk,
yeah,
it also, and it's like when you're with the wrong agent, you're with the wrong manager. Like it's like they've chosen you before you've chosen. So then anything they say has so much more power
yes,
than what you believe. Like your art is now dependent on those eyes and not your own. Like it becomes something
exactly.
else, right? So beautifully said. Amy, I'm
Mm,
sure everyone here is gagging for how to work with you or how to know about your stuff. So I might have a few more questions, but before we go there, can you
yeah,
share
yeah.
with everybody a little bit about, if someone was like, I want to know more, I want to learn more, where would you want them to go, or where would you direct them to first?
Beautiful. Well, you can hop over to my Instagram, which is inspired to write. And you'll find me there constantly. That's where I'm sharing most of my thoughts that are just popping up into my head. But there's also my podcast, which is called Unpublished. And I do that with my husband, who is also an author. And we talk about what it means to be a creative weekly, and we love it there. And then there's my website, which is amiemcnee.com. And you can find my courses there on journaling. You can find my books there, The Procrastinator, The Burnout Artist, The Perfectionist. And my paid podcast as well, which is called It's Time to Write. And that's like, I'm your little creative angel on your shoulder, getting you to create each day.
I love that. And I want to make sure everyone knows how to spell your name. It's
Yeah, that's a great point.
Amie. Yes. Amie McNee, McNee.
Thank
Right.
you, Brian.
Right. So in all the work that you've done, I like to
Yeah.
ask this question, and I'm actually stealing this question from someone who asked it to me. So I want to give her props right now. Sam Valentine, if you're listening, and a lot of my listeners know Sam Valentine, she asked me this question. It's always stayed with me. And it is, what has working in this way or working with other creatives taught you or surprised you along the way?
Oh, that we are all so beautifully similar.
Mm.
That we're all moving through very similar stuff. And whilst it can feel like we are so freaking alone, and that this is just us, and it's so embarrassing that this is happening to just me, and these narratives are just my own, and I'm the smallest creative in the world, that we are all moving through. Obviously there's variance, and like we've got nuances to each of our lives, but we are all moving through a very, very similar experience. And when we come together and see one another, like I have a membership, and so I've got a creative community that comes together weekly. And when I watch us witness one another and hold one another through the same kind of pain, because we're all experiencing it in one lens or another, the power that comes from that is like unbelievable. And the way that we can see each other and hold each other through it, we become so much more powerful, and we don't burn out as quickly. We have energy, and just being able to see one another move through similar things.
Beautiful. That is so beautiful. Can I ask another question? Because I really want
Yeah,
to.
just keep
Thanks.
going.
Give me all this time. I love it. So this is something that I'm challenged by at times, and I feel like you might be as well, in the messaging that you put into the world and in how you're trying to right. My goal is not to say, stay up on the cross, stay suffering. You must be suffering. You are suffering. And so I'm the solution, which is some kind of bullshit cult
Mm,
leader kind of language that people would use, right? It's because I don't want to say you are suffering. So when you're languaging to people and you're talking the way that you just said, we're not like meeting together to celebrate pain,
no.
right? And as a writer, I'm just curious for you. I don't even know if my question is going to be a good one. So you can
No,
stop me at any
I'm
time, right?
seeing it.
Right? How do you language and speak to your audience in a way that says, this might be how you're feeling, but it's not. This is how I would say probably. So maybe I'm answering my own question, but I would love to hear what your reflection is.
Mm,
So I say, you might feel this way right now. So let's work on it. Or
yeah.
it's really important to me. We've talked about this as my team. We've even talked about how we don't hold any person in a position of victimhood, in a position
Mm,
of your life sucks, we're the solution. Like that's the worst messaging in the world, right? That's not who I'm going to
mm,
be a cult leader. That would be what a cult leader would say, right?
mm,
But I do think we have to acknowledge, I know you're doing big stuff.
mm.
And so I realize stuff might come up because you're doing big stuff. How can I
Yeah, I
help,
really
right?
like that. I really like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
The nuance that's required when we do this work is so mind blowing. And it is so
Right.
frustrating watching the lack of nuance that happens, particularly in social media with
Mm-hmm.
people, exactly as you say, like there's just no nuance. It's, oh, you're the victim and I'm the savior. We need to have complex conversations around this because it is such a complex journey. And I really like what you say. Like, it is really hard. Like, I'm thinking constantly about how I can make sure that my language isn't disempowering, how, I want people to feel seen in, again, that wild, wonderful journey that is creating. And I want
Mm-hmm.
you to know that I know that resistance is going to come up, but you are not powerless, and that I have complete faith in you and what it is that you are doing. And I know that there is an opportunity for creative success for you. I think for me, the big narrative, the big foundational narrative that I changed was, I'm never going to make money doing what I love. I'm going to remain poor and I'm never going to be able to sell my books. I'm never going to be able to connect. These were like the stories that I really believed that a lot of
Right.
other creatives are very consumed by.
Totally.
And I changed it. And I know that being a creative can be financially abundant, that it is responsible for me to be a creative, that
Mm.
it is the right thing for me to do, that it is absolutely where I belong, and that if it's a calling that you feel called towards, then it is completely possible for you to have an abundant, creative, financially abundant, joyful, peaceful, creative life. And I always want to make sure that when I'm talking about resistance, when I'm talking about the hard times, it's all underlined with this idea that I know that there is a creatively abundant future possible for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said, is responsible for me to
Oh,
be
I
creative.
love that.
That's such a good one. I was saying it nonstop. I mean, you self-anointed and respond. Like it is. I always say like it is selfish for you not to do this because I
It is
think we also have this
selfish.
story for you to being creative is I'm being selfish by being creative. No, it's selfish for you not to because your best
Exactly.
expression is you doing it. Yeah.
Exactly. It is what we do is the most generous thing that humans do. The most vulnerable and the most generous. And whenever I finish a piece of, content or finish a piece of writing or finish my whole book, is this vulnerable and is this generous is what I ask. And, that's how I judge what I create. Is it vulnerable? Is it generous? And because what we do is so, so generous. And when we hold back art, when we think, oh, it's not good enough, I don't know if I want to share it, that's a selfish act. When
Mm,
there are people out there who could be changed by your creations, and you're daring to keep it to yourself, like that's
yeah.
irresponsible.
Yeah.
It's irresponsible to feel called towards creating and then to think, oh no, it's childlike, or I'm not good enough. Like, the responsible thing to do is to stand up and to make things and to create
Yes.
and to share and be vulnerable. I love the narrative rewrite of choosing to live a creative life is the responsible thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you just said. And I want to kind of, because I think what it also brought me to is the idea that taste is one thing, perfectionism is a different.
Oh, mama.
Right?
Yeah.
Like we got that. And so that I can just see how being in a community of actors or community of artists of any creative type is like, let's just check. Are we being perfectionists here? Or is this actually just what you want? It's about your art. Because that could be great. You might be having that dance inside your head. Let us help you. That's where you need that community to
You
listen to
do.
the chorus in your head that's screaming and saying, I want attention and I want attention. And you can say, oh, this is about taste. Yeah. You could, it
Mm.
needs another revision. You're completely right. It wasn't perfection. You're right this time. Yeah. You have a taste level here. Great. But guess what? Your taste level doesn't get to be in charge for the next 6 months. You get like 3 weeks to do it. Like that's where accountability comes in, right?
I love that, Brian. Yeah, you're so right. The horrible blurred lines between taste and perfection is something that we often do need support for, because we just don't know
Yeah,
where
that's why I think
we're
another
at.
person needs to be involved. Yes.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
Amy, I could talk to you all day. This was such I would just say this was such a great conversation. And so I know tons of people are going to be listening to the podcast and you're searching you out, but I just want to thank you for giving your vulnerable and honest and energetic, enthusiastic time to this conversation around creativity. I really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Brian. I'm so
Thank you so much.
grateful. It is just so lovely to just get to talk about this incredibly, again, wild, but very wonderful journey that we're on. I'm very, very grateful for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.